We're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining our second webinar of the year, Best Practices in Real-Time Energy Monitoring. We are excited to have BuildPulse with us today. Jason Burt is the founder of BuildPulse, and Rolf von Sassen is the VP of Marketing and Product at Lucid. In this webinar, we're going to talk a lot about the data, which is really the heart of getting to real-time energy data and being able to monitor it, and how to improve your building performance at a high level, and then drilling down into your equipment performance, which is where Jason and BuildPulse will step in. We'll talk about next steps on how you can begin this journey to real-time energy monitoring, and then we'll talk about a few, actually we'll open it up to questions at the end. So if you do have questions along the way, feel free to put those into the question box in your GoToWebinar panel, and we'll address those at the end. So with that, Jason's going to tell us a little bit about himself and BuildPulse.
Hi, I'm Jason Bird. I'm the VP of Product at BuildPulse. I have a background working with Fortune 500 companies, Walmart, Google, and other groups to help them determine what KPIs, key performance indicators, are important for their operations, and then helping them sort of standardize and report on that. And I took that background and started a company with my co-founder Bryce in buildings, where we basically take very similar principles and help facility teams and energy managers figure out what KPIs to report on and what's the best practices to actually use that data in their day-to-day.
Well, thanks, Jason. We're excited to have you here with us. This is Rolf von Sassen, I'm the VP of Marketing and Products here at Lucid. And really thank you all to joining us today. If you have questions throughout, feel free to put those in the questions or chat sessions. We'll try and address some of those as we go along, as well as we have some time at the end to hit those. Just as a word of caution, I am coming to you live from Oakland, so if you hear a police siren in the background, that's a disclaimer right there. So one of the things that I think is so exciting for all of us that are in this in this industry and working with buildings and energy management is I think there's such tremendous room for improvement still. And you know, one of the things that we talk about a lot here at Lucid is this statistic from the Energy Star organization from the EPA saying that 30% of energy consumed by U.S. commercial buildings is wasted. And obviously that opens the door to a lot of opportunity and savings. But I think what's even more interesting, and this is, Jason and I have had different conversations about this, is even if you have a building with a 90 Energy Star rating, they're still finding 10 to 15% energy savings. So the improvements are there and the opportunities are there to have sort of tremendous impact on your organization. Talked a little bit about data, and one of the things that I sort of think of recently is we're here in the Bay Area, and I drive the old family van, but I've got a lot of friends who have made the switch over to a Tesla, and I've had the opportunity to ride in some a couple of times, and it's very impressive, quite honestly, to think about all the data and all the information that's coming through that car and what is shown on the dashboard, and with all the distractions to the driver piece of the side of it, it's just amazing the kind of information that's available, and it's not even just available to the driver, but I have one friend who tracks what happens, who's driving the car, and how fast it's going, what the charge is on his handheld, right, on his smartphone. So I think that to a certain degree sets the standard to what do we expect out of data these days. Now, unfortunately, a lot of us do not live in this world when it comes to our buildings and our infrastructure. A lot of us live in we live in this world here, right? We live in a world where we're looking at bills, we're looking at summarized information, we're looking at dated information. We're not looking at information that is readily set for us to make decisions on, to be actionable insights for us. And I think that's really what we want to talk about here, is how do we start creating that, and what are the advantages of doing that? I think one of the things that's so interesting about when we talk about this actionable information, and I've had the opportunity in previous lives to work at LinkedIn and at other companies that have been very data-driven in the CRM space and in other parts of the energy industry. And it's so critical to know the audience, right? I think that's sort of one of the places to start from. And for us on the Lucid side, we sort of think about these four key constituents that we work with on the operations and energy management side, the people that are they need information to reduce consumptions, to verify performance, to forecast more accurately. Sustainability managers look to identify new projects for compliance reporting, for engaging occupants. And then this area of occupant and occupant engagement is something we're very active in at Lucid, where it's about visibility into the impact that these people are making, engaging these people in a very interesting way to get them to act, to have competitions that get people really engaged and excited about what they're doing. And then finally, finance and planning, right? How do I make capital decisions? How do I track performance and the budgeting, reliability on the budgeting aspects? So it's just critical to know your audience in terms of getting the information and the data out of it. And what was interesting in some conversations I had with Jason was, you know, they have some different audiences in some of the information that they tackle. So Jason, talk a little bit about sort of the audience for build polls and in sort of a little more tactical and equipment oriented people and what information they're looking for.
Yeah, and so, you know, going back to your sort of the information overload, for lack of a better word, you know, as more sensors come available and more systems come online, more often teams have to manage more and more. And this sort of adds up and will start to sort of compile into the energy level report. And so if you're an energy manager, you often see sort of that top line, you know, what is the cost that we're paying at the end of the day, where are sort of demand peaks, where's maybe my building performing at a worse Energy Star score than another building in the portfolio. But in the day-to-day, you know, the facility teams who have ownership over the building automation, who have ownership over the operation of the equipment, they're in this balancing act of really trying to make sure that their tenants are comfortable and they're trying to maintain equipment. So, you know, where are areas of overlap in the reporting where you basically can have a handoff where both teams sort of have a win-win scenario. So it's important to keep in mind, oftentimes when people think of data, they think the most impact comes just from their own team sort of using it, but oftentimes we see a bigger impact coming when the data is opened up and sort of shared between different groups, which I think you guys are doing pretty well on the Lucid side as far as centralizing that data.
I think that's such a key part is that I think with the data that's available and being able to share this data with other people, right? Bringing other people into the decision. And we're seeing that a lot with people that roles that are in finance, executive management. We have a lot of customers who they're kind of seeing the path now of what used to be sort of backroom decisions and conversations that are part of the boardroom conversations because they're just critical part not only of the energy management or managing a building, but it's actually a significant part of the company performance overall. Now, one of the recent studies by CABA that Lucid participated in was really interesting in terms of the focus was about IoT, the Internet of Things, and what does it show? What can people learn? What's interesting about that? And one of the things that I found very interesting was that when they started looking at where does it actually impact, on the left-hand side, you see that there was a tremendous focus. So when participants were asked about how do they feel that is the most important piece of ways that IoT and this information will impact their operations, a lot of it was focused around reducing energy consumption and spend, right? It was about improving financial planning. It was about reducing energy consumption and spend. Those are the things that really jumped to the top of what they were looking for and what was important to them. The second grouping is improving operational efficiency by streamlining and integrating building systems, enabling predictive maintenance to improve system lifecycle and reliability, and then offering more data information on building performance. So very operational, very pragmatic ways of using the data. And I think if you look over to the right, and in terms of the application value associated with IoT, again, we're looking at very pragmatic, very practical things, and hopefully things that we're going to be talking about today in terms of receiving a notification for any building systems that are operating outside normal parameters, receiving advanced notification if a device is on the verge of failure. So these are, again, very much focused on immediate notification, getting a handle on the kind of information, the kind of data that's coming through these systems. So with that as a backdrop, what we want to then go through now is we want to talk a little bit about how you transform this data into actionable insights across your building portfolio. But then as you get more information about what's happening across your building portfolio, how do you drill down into specific equipment and start utilizing the data that resides there and making the most of that. So let's talk about the building performance, and it's really all about unifying building data across your portfolio. So collecting all your building performance data to get a real-time integrated view of operations, and then use that to drive improvements. And that could be from directly from different meters, from mobile devices. It could be from different building management systems, from IoT sensors, from ERP systems. Being able to create a cohesive picture that gives an overall view of how is this portfolio performing and where are the opportunities to save and to improve. The second part of it is being able to share this insight with occupants and stakeholders. We were just talking about the different types of audiences that are interested in this data. And so it all becomes about, how do you engage occupants in conservation efforts and bring this information to life to them? How do you make your business case for getting funding, having that data available? How do you showcase accomplishments to executive management? And how do you simplify external reporting, right? All different audiences that if you can bring this information into one place, it's not a matter of, it doesn't become a matter of running Excel spreadsheets, but a matter of in real time being able to access and look at this information. And obviously the third piece of this is leveraging that building data to improve performance, and using that historical data, utility data, real-time data, assuming that you have different types of data in different systems, being able to bring that data together into one place and finding unnecessary resource costs, identifying performance issues, and then prioritizing those projects, as you can see how important some of those projects are versus some other ones. What I wanted to do is run through 3 specific examples of how we've seen some of our customers make use of this information, specifically in the area of leveraging the building data to improve performance. Scheduling optimization, building portfolio drift mitigation, and then peak demand management. In the first one, we're talking about scheduling, right? We're talking about using the data that you have to create what we call a heat map, and visualizing the building schedule to understand the performance, right? When is it getting turned on in the morning? When is it getting shut off in the evening? When are the peak times? Using that to find the biggest outliers, right? Finding the biggest consumers and peak demand charge contributors here. As you can see in the green, that's the good place, right? That's when a very little information, energy is being consumed. And then you have the red, which should coordinate with the occupants and the use of the building as in the highest demand. In addition with this, also receiving notifications when demand or consumption exceeds a threshold and avoiding leaks or peak demand charges, right, with that. An example of a before and after, for example, is if you be able to get a sort of this is this whole thing about being able to step out and step away from, to get enough perspective to look at, okay, if I look at this portfolio or look at this one building, I can take a look at, and obviously, on the left-hand side, I have times where the building is on, there are things that are running, they're not getting shut off at the end of the day, and I can get sort of that large view that tells me, okay, well, things are definitely out of whack here. How do I get from the left-hand side, from before, over to the after? So I've got a, so then on the after side, you can see, well, it's not just a matter of finding the outliers, but it's also finding the way, okay, we should be consistently starting up a building, stopping a building at a certain time to manage the schedule and get that tuned in. The second piece that I want to talk about is this concept of portfolio drift, where there's a tremendous amount of investment that goes into optimizing a building, but then a lot of times these buildings, when left to their own devices, they start drifting again into less optimal performance. So again, being able to centralize this information, as on the right-hand side, for example, you can see an entire portfolio that kind of shows not only the increase or decrease. So the increase, for example, is the big red square, a decrease being the Chicago office, a green square, for example. But also by the size of the square, we can see how large of an impact this is. Because, again, we want to make sure we're prioritizing our energies or our efforts and resources in the right places, in the places where we can be laser focused on spotting outliers that matter the most and require our attention. This type of information we've also seen in our customers is tremendously helpful in visualizing for different stakeholders about why the resources should be applied to that, what the impact of it is, that it is an acute issue. So again, sort of a great way of identifying and tracking and making sure that you stay on top of the improvements that you have already made. And then the third example I want to talk about is improving performance around peak demand management, right? Peak demand charges on an electrical bill can be as much as 40% of the total spend. So understanding the demand curve, understanding that at different levels is really important. And what we see is being able to look at those demand curves and trends, not only for one specific meter or just one building or just one part of a building, but being able to see it for a group of buildings, a portfolio. So from there, what you can do is you can then see where, what should I be focused in on? Can I drill down into this? Setting up alerts for when demand approaches or hits a certain price schedule threshold, so you can actually pull things back, pull usage back, and being able to study these peak demand charges and events to improve future performance. And I think this is a great example or a great point to jumping off into now if I start seeing the effects here and the impact here, how do I from here now drill down into the specific equipment or the places where I then can improve and maintain at the equipment level when I really start drilling down to the detailed information. And Jason, I'll hand it off to you here for you to take it.
Great. So yeah, back to the sort of handoff between the energy managers and the facility teams that are actually running the equipment day to day. What are strategies that different teams are taking to actually sort of drill down and see what issues are occurring? So that demand peak charge that Ralph showed you, this is an underlying graph of all the equipment that's actually running in the equipment, the graph on the right. So one of our energy managers, she was looking for peak load, she was looking for equipment running 24/7, and looking for similar sort of outliers based on energy analysis. And so she asked for this sort of drill down report so she could work with the facility team to identify areas for equipment improvement. So as you can see, for this specific building, there's equipment running 24/7 on the left, from 12 to 6, when technically it probably should stage on sometime between 6 and 7. And there's some sort of demand peaks in the middle of the day. And so the main question when you're looking at sets of reports is what does the handoff look like? How can I, if I'm comparing my energy analysis to my equipment runtime, do the graphs overlap? Is it shared in the same way? Am I comparing a bar graph to a circle graph? It's important to keep these things in mind. It's also important to figure out, because that building drift, as Ralph mentioned, often comes from the fact that one person is making the change and the person who's supposed to verify it often maybe forgets about it or spends a week or two taking time to actually go verify it. So Ralph, if you don't mind going to the next slide. The question arises with these different reports. What specifically are things that we want to get ahead of and be more proactive of? What are the things that we're going to be checking daily and do handoffs on? And what are things that we're going to either check weekly or monthly? So that last report that you saw was a morning sort of check for equipment runtime, where the energy manager would go sort of check to see where there outliers in buildings, and then they would drill down maybe 10 minutes every other day with different facility teams to figure out what specific equipment was an outlier. At the top, that's a snapshot of temperatures, and so the facility team would use sort of temperature snapshots to make sure everything was sort of in balance. So that's where real-time data comes in handy. It's important to keep in mind that if you have this real-time data, as Ralph mentioned, you want to aggregate it up so that way you can find where outliers are at. And then, out of those day-to-day sort of checks, going back to a weekly check, can I see improvement week over week? Do I know that my team that's making the verifications, are they actually coming through and making notes of the equipment that they're making changes on? Do we have any major seasonality or set point changes that across the board are making an impact on our facilities? And then at the end of all this, how does that roll up into a sort of monthly report? And from the high level to the low level, how do I know that people are making changes and sort of keep track of it? If you don't mind going to the next one. So this is an example of what one of the teams that's using our software is doing. They have a building tech who comes in and he'll make a note in their equipment manual in the morning if there's any major equipment change, if they change a set point or something that they think is going to have an impact at a large building level. Maybe it's all the schedules for a school that is out for the holidays. And then the energy manager normally comes in and compares the energy used versus sort of runtime day over day. And then based on that, they come back at the end of the week and they look at a runtime report. And these are the types of things. You don't have to audit everything, just choosing maybe 3 things a week that the team sort of coordinates on, either big pieces of equipment or outliers or big buildings. Those 3 to 5 things are the things that add up and start to cut away at the building drift. And it's important to keep in mind that having somebody else come back through and just even ask questions and verify can make a huge impact on top of these analytics. And so slide 22 is the next slide. It kind of points out that at a high level, oftentimes what we find is equipment will be running 24/7, and either the energy teams or the facility teams just don't realize it because they don't have time to go through and manually audit every single piece of equipment. Oftentimes they will change the schedule and they assume the schedule is correctly controlling the equipment. So figuring out a strategy to go through and audit, sort of doing a rolling audit of these major pieces of equipment often has a large impact, because if you're running equipment 24/7, it reduces the energy life of the equipment potentially by 25%, and you'll get 4x energy costs on that. So outside of equipment scheduling, the next layer is fault detection diagnostics. And so on the fault detection diagnostics side, slide 23, a very similar story sort of arises. So you might have daily energy reports, but it's hard to catch the underlying issues such as potential freeze lockout or other things that could have major impact on your equipment. And so some building automation systems have standard rules that you can build in, but a lot of the new automated reporting and analytics engines, the value that they provide is they'll actually go through and audit your equipment every 5 minutes. There's a school district in Seattle where we're based. They have 2 full-time techs that use their building automation system to manually audit systems, and they have 90 buildings. In a year, they finish about 40 buildings. They can't even get to their entire portfolio. So it's just with the sheer amount of systems and data that they have coming out, even using a building automation system, it's quite a manual process. And if you mind going to slide 24, so the last slide was a breakout of, at a high level, sort of energy or issues across the portfolio. And this is the breakout of a specific issue. This is a leaking economizer that we found in one of the buildings. And you can see this little gap in the middle in December. If the buildings are off for that time period and your team's coming through and sort of doing an audit, they're going to miss out on these recurring issues, right? Because the team audit is still just taking a snapshot in time. They're really not looking at the issue at a higher level, sort of across your portfolio. And so this is a pretty common slide that we show on 25 for what a building automation system normally looks like. So if you just look at this, this is an air handling unit. All the labels are specific for the system, and the data seems to just be sort of running what looks good for the best that I can tell. But can you really, if you're auditing the system, really know if there's an issue or not if you're manually inspecting it? And on the next slide, on slide 26, we actually highlight when the actual issue occurred and fired based on standard logic found in commissioning and other groups. And so I know that was a little fast, but at a high level, the earlier slide we showed a portfolio-wide sort of equipment issue, and we drilled all the way down to a specific issue. And so in building reports and analytics, it's important to keep in mind, can you have a report that a facility manager or business owner can look at, not understanding building automation systems at all, and can they drill down and have the conversation all the way down to a specific piece of equipment? So tying those two areas together are areas that are going to help sort of streamline reporting and analytics, and also help streamline two different organizations working together. And that's pretty much it. I know I went through that a little fast, but if people have questions, happy to go through more of it at the end.
I think it just so resonates with me, right? I'm thinking about, again, sort of what we started with, right, is capturing the data and creating actual insights out of the data. And most importantly, and I think this is just the most important part, is knowing who the audience is that can do something and create action, right? Can transform this data into action. That's why it's so important that there are individuals who, this level of data is just ideal for them. They can really take this and do something with it. Whereas you need to know that for other parts of the audience, they're looking for something very different that potentially is across your entire portfolio or your entire organization, and having the ability to do that. And I think that's where we've seen customers do very well and be very successful in being able to balance those things. So I think one of the things that we wanted to leave you with too is some of the key takeaways in terms of next steps about getting started with this. And this really comes from the success stories that I've seen with companies from universities like Stanford or Gonzaga, to school districts, to companies like LinkedIn, McKesson, and others that have sort of gone on this journey, because I think that's really what it is. It's sort of this journey that you kind of go through. And first, it's what I observe is always it's about knowing what data you have and what data you don't have, and really being able to do an inventory of what data do I have access to, and then secondly, getting that data that you do have organized and getting ahead of it. And I think that sometimes I feel that individuals don't take a proactive enough stance because they feel like they don't have all the data they want, or they don't have every building on real-time data, or they don't have, they're not tracking the equipment like they are, or things like that. But I think from there it's important to just focus on the data that you have and making sure that you can get that organized and start impacting some pieces. And maybe that means that part of the portfolio is much more optimized than other parts of the portfolio, but it's sort of starting to get going and building that inertia. What's anything you want to add to those 2 points, Jason?
Yeah, I think it's true for all sort of industries. Anytime you're dealing with analytics, anytime you get started doing this, I think oftentimes people want to do everything at once. But the best thing to do is to sort of start smaller and then go big. And to your point of figuring out what data do you have, figuring out what KPIs are important to your organization. Are you interested in sort of comfort reports? Do you want to make sure your tenants are very comfortable and that call complaints go down? Is it trying to figure out shaving off energy costs, peak demand, and things like that? Figuring out a couple of those KPIs and then figuring out how to work cross department and just doing small things. Maybe it's 30 minutes a week between an energy manager and a tech. Maybe it's an hour with a facility manager and a tech, just verifying and going on one of those KPIs. I think that really gets people going and succeeding in this versus what often happens, which it's an all or nothing kind of approach where people just become overwhelmed with all the data that they have, and they'll step back or not use it as effectively as they could.
That's a really good point. So the next couple of points, right? Get your main stakeholders engaged. So know who really cares in your company and know why they should care. And that really goes together with the fourth point of agreeing on goals and KPIs, which you had mentioned, right? Really deciding on, am I going to focus this on occupant comfort? Am I going to focus on cost mitigation? Am I focusing on sustainability efforts? And I think because sometimes some of these efforts have competing priorities and goals, I think it's important to sort of decide, hey, this is the piece that's most important, and this is what's really going to drive the decision making. And then this concept of democratizing the energy management information, I think is just critical. It's really sort of, you know, for lack of a better word, sometimes, or saying a lot of times I talk about, you know, bringing this energy data and this information from the basement into the boardroom. And we've seen some tremendous success stories with individuals that have been able to do that because they can start telling that narrative and telling that story about how the individual performance of different buildings or of different pieces of equipment can impact not only the bottom line, but also productivity and the business overall. And then last, you know, we find a friend. I mean, I think that's just good policy in life, period. But specifically here, I'm referring to, you know, finding a friend that someone that has gone through a similar journey or is on a similar journey, and being able to bounce ideas off of them, being able to learn from their experiences. And Jason, do you have anything you want to sort of add to that part of it? I'm sure you've seen that in your in Build Pulse as well. Some individuals that have succeeded being able to share that with others.
Yeah, and the combination of, you know, finding somebody, if you're an energy manager, finding another energy manager who is sort of starting to make micro changes, for lack of a word, or has taken up a new strategy to bounce ideas off of, I think is a great idea. And the other side is just even internally. Oftentimes, I think teams are interested in making the change. They're just worried about sort of being burned. And so at the end of the day, they want to make sure their tenants are comfortable. And so how can you make sort of those small changes and measure them and show the impact that the people who actually are making the changes or have ownership of the equipment, you know, show the impacts they're making and really make them champions. I think it's great to figure out a good way to internally collaborate that way.
All right, great. With that, we'll open it up to more questions from the audience. So again, feel free to type in your questions and we'll address as many as we can. There's a few already in, and I think the first, kind of on the note of getting started and next steps, and maybe Rolf, you kick this off, but what are some examples of people that we've worked with that are doing this successfully? And maybe you can expand on a little bit of how they went about it.
Yeah, you know, I think one great example is Gonzaga University. I'll take that as one, who really has sort of looked at the way they've approached their energy management in sort of three key ways. And I think one is some of this automation and controls where they're using automated logic to do a lot of that work there. Then they're actually using build polls for their equipment tracking, their fault detection, and looking at that specific part of the information. And then they use Lucid for their overarching building portfolio data management and for the occupant engagement aspect of it. So I think that's one example where somebody, Gonzaga has put a lot of work into it, but sort of has grown into having a portfolio of different solutions that tackle different aspects of it. And I think that sort of goes a little bit to what we were saying before about you need to think about the different. It's not sort of a one size fits all type of a solution. You have to look at different aspects of it. I think another great story is McKesson, who is a global company and has we're talking about hundreds of facilities across the globe. And one thing that they've done is they use Lucid's Building OS as their way of tracking their buildings portfolio. But they didn't start out by saying, hey, everybody has to integrate into this. They kind of took a critical mass of buildings, which was some of their most critical ones, and put that into the system. And now, as they start growing the centralization of all this information, they've actually put a mandate in place that any new system that's tracking this building type of information needs to integrate into Lucid's Building OS to be able to be part of that. So again, it's not a matter of doing this huge one-time event, but it's sort of getting pieces in place and getting a program in place so that as the information that's being collected continues to grow, that it also maintains the ability to grow in one place, in one central view.
Okay. Jason, do you have anything to add to that question? So again, examples of how to get started and people doing this successfully.
Yeah, and that's, I think Ralph hit on all the major points. I think one thing to keep in mind if you're starting to centralize sort of reporting and analytics, the value really starts adding up when you're aggregating information to sort of find those outliers. And so there's kind of this middle ground where oftentimes groups might just try to do like automate reporting in one building, but then they don't seem to have success, or they try to automate everything and they don't seem to have success. So it's a balance to figure out, what's the best amount of information to sort of get in and start processing. Our customers and the groups that sort of use our software, it seems like if they start with maybe 5 to 10 buildings, it gives them an added savings where they can shift a little bit of their team's time instead of manually auditing these buildings to actually looking at sort of these top priorities. So like Gonzaga, Ralph brought up, one of their techs shifted about, I think, 10 or 15% of his time hunting for issues to just looking at those outliers and dealing with them. And so that's key to keep in mind is as these new systems and things come online, you bring them into the fold, where's your team's time being spent in the reporting and analytics, and how can you help them focus and sort of improve? And that's what Gonzaga brought up as far as their goals. They're trying to get the best tools for their team and just streamline their team as much as possible.
Let's see here. So another one we've got is we're interested to know how you turn energy information into dollar savings information. Do you have a rate tariff calculator built into the system, or what sort of hardware and metering sensors need to be installed first? It's a pretty long question, so maybe we start with that part of it, and then
Yeah, I think from the perspective from Lucid's perspective, what we've seen is we definitely part of the solution is this critical piece that is great touching on, right? Is you got to turn usage information to dollar information, and we've seen some of the most successful projects hinge on exactly the ability to do that. We do have a rate and tariffs engine as part of Building OS. That allows for that kind of forecasting and budget planning. And what I like to talk about is I like to talk about sort of transcending the language of finance and facilities, right? Bringing those two together to be able to talk a common language, because in facilities, what we really need is we need the buy-in from finance to be able to give us the money for the projects and to have the confidence that it is wisely invested. So one of the key success characteristics that I've seen in people that are doing very successfully is they really understand how to speak the language of finance and how to be able to leverage the information and insights to be able to show and track the impact of a project, whether it be a lighting retrofit project, whether it be new metering, new sub-meters that allow for decreasing the peak demand management, and so forth. I'd be really curious, Jason, on your end, what sort of like have you observed in the most successful ways of building the business case for tracking and this kind of information?
Yeah, so on our end, because we're taking kind of more the bottom-up approach at the equipment level, we built what we call a weighted estimated cost calculator. And so what that does is, based on equipment types, it will give you roughly a 5 to 10% estimate on the impacts that the change will make that you're looking at. And the goal of this is, if you have 1,000 issues across your portfolio, which 10 issues can my team go fix today? We found that energy teams, while at a high level, the rates and tariffs and things were super useful, it became hard to, if you have 1,000 issues, you don't want to go through and calculate what the cost is before your team actually goes and fixes it. So we use basically that weighted estimated cost using ASHRAE and other standards to allow your team to go make the change. And then once the change is made, that's where you can take the data of how long did the issue occur and all these other factors to input your tariffs and variables to actually get a more accurate calculation to take to the rest of the team. So on our end, we focus more on the fact that the runtime and other things, once you fixed it, you can then go sort of show the savings of it. It flips it a little bit, I think. But yeah, I think the combination of the high-level sort of energy reports showing the before and after, and then the follow-up sort of runtime showing the actual equipment change has been powerful for a lot of groups. University of New Hampshire, they have a revolving energy fund where they all the savings that they find, they can take and look for reinvestment. So they're using our tool to go through and sort of start to categorize more of those issues. Does that answer your question? Or?
Yeah, thank you, Jason. And we do have quite a few questions, so if we don't get to your question, we will make sure the appropriate person follows up with you. We do have one more that I think, Jason, maybe you can start with this. And so the question is, when you're trying to get this real-time, data and turn it into action, what are some issues that often come up and maybe are low-hanging fruit in building operations? And I'll just leave it at that and let you expand based on what you've worked on with customers.
Yeah, so between sort of the separation of the scheduling and then the more complex sort of operation, sequence of operations and things like that, it's oftentimes easier for a lot of our customers to do audits at the scheduling side of things. And so pretty much every building that we've been in, customers assume that their schedules, their controls are actually operating to their schedule. And so that's, if you're looking for sort of low-hanging fruit, that's a real quick area that you can sort of come in and do an audit on. Are your statuses actually changing on your equipment based on schedules?
I think some of the things that we see on our end is when individuals are looking at their portfolio, they start seeing things like, you sort of see it in one place where they have parts of their portfolio that are very optimized, running really well, but then they see other areas that haven't been, just jumps out at them, that maybe they're spending way too much way too many resources in one area that's producing marginal improvement, while there are other areas that could really use, with little effort, they could do some tremendous help there. I think the heat map that I talked about earlier is one of the absolute first things that people go to and look at. And does that coordinate with shut on, turn on and shut off? Other areas too is when they start seeing buildings next to each other. So there was one of our customers down in the South Bay here in California, in the San Francisco area. They had a couple of different office buildings that, once they started looking at it, it was just obvious all of a sudden there was one building that was just totally out of whack. And they had never really realized it before, in the sense of they weren't really looking at them next to each other. And as it turned out, they were getting billed for one of the gas meters for one of the neighboring buildings. And so that's what really jumps out. Another one example is on a campus, there were some water leaks that were happening, that all of a sudden they kind of caught those through putting in the real-time alerts. So with a water leak that wouldn't have been detected for probably quite a long time, they were able to start seeing that information right away. So I think those are some of the low-hanging fruit that we see happening right away with putting this kind of system in place.
Okay, great. Well, thank you both. We're going to wrap it up. Again, we'll have people from both BuildPulse and Lucid contacts, especially those that had specific questions.